Okay, Punojoy, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I have unmuted you so that you can tell me from time to time whether I am audible. So there is only one person unmuted. I hope all the others are able to hear me. Can you, as a representative of the class, send me a yes that you are able to hear me on the chat window?
Should I send you that?
Yeah. Okay. So fine. So I see that all of you are able to hear me. So we'll start. Going to the presentation mode. Are you able to see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Fine. So today we will talk about this particular paper, Fairness and Balance in the Prestige Press. So as I said that this segment of lectures will be mostly on media bias. So today we will talk about this particular paper, which was published in 1991 in the Journal of Communication Quarterly, Mass Communication Quarterly. And these three authors, they are very famous in studying media bias, and they have many more follow-up papers after this. So if you are interested, you can search their names and you can get an idea of, in fact, they have written a full book on this topic. So the idea of this paper is as follows. It's a very simple idea, but a very interesting case. seems like there is some issue with yeah, okay. So this paper actually subscribes to the social responsibility theory of journalists. So what does it mean by social responsibility? So in fact, this has connections to all those moral and ethical intuitions that we had studied long back. So the social responsibility outlines that journalists should have a limit to their own freedom of expression when they are actually reporting news. So they should typically make sure that all voices are represented almost equally. If there is a debate going on, then all voices should be represented equally. Be it a voice from a minority group, be it a voice from a majority group, all voices should be represented almost equally. So there is this Commission on Freedom of Press, also called the Hutchins Commission, set in the USA, which puts forward these two guidelines for social responsibility. One is that less partisan approach to news reporting. I told you earlier also that this partisanism is a important fact in all this ethical literature. So you express minimal amount of bias, and then the newspapers must provide more than one side of controversial issues. So what happens is that if there is a controversial issue, in many cases, many of the newspapers, probably you have also come across many such cases, the newspaper only covers one side of the story. So this is something that is heavily discouraged in the social responsibility theory. Okay. So there are, so if we want to operationalize this idea of social responsibility theory, then there are three things that one has to look into. One is the accuracy, that is how accurate information are you actually portraying in the report. Fairness, this notion we already have, but here we will redefine fairness in terms of media bias, as we will see soon how we define this. And then balance. So these are the three tenets that one has to be careful about if you really want to adhere to the social responsibility properties. So the current paper has the following two hypotheses. Prestige newspapers will present both sides of local controversies more often than large circulation newspapers. I'll come about what is prestige newspapers in a while. And prestige newspapers will present more balanced accounts of local controversies than will large circulation newspapers. So the first point deals with fairness. The second point deals with balance. So now the immediate question, I guess, that you have is what is a prestige newspaper? So in the United States, actually, news media agencies are classified based on a set of prestige rules. So basically, like what is the history of reporting, which kind of reporters have been reporting, what has been their social status, etc., etc. So all this together actually is assimilated into a factor which determines whether a newspaper is a prestige newspaper or not. So basically, as the name suggests, it's kind of something which is prestigious. Okay, and there are a set of earmarked prestige newspapers that is like guideline in their equivalent PTI. Okay, so the same commission actually talks about talks about how to classify certain newspapers as prestige newspapers. Okay, and they are comparing these prestige newspapers with large circulation newspapers. So these large circulation newspapers are those which are typically not classified as prestige newspapers, but they have a very large circulation. So they are read by a large population base. Okay, so the idea is that how do these two types of or these two categories of newspapers actually can be differentiated in terms of fairness and balance. Question is whether they do have a difference on that? That's the first question. So as you understand, in order to establish this, first we need some data set, and the second is we also need some operational definition of what is fairness in this context and what is balance. So we'll go one by one. So operationalizing fairness. So what the authors do, as per the authors, there are 4 categories of news reporting. Okay, whenever you are reporting a controversy, so this entire reporting analysis that they have done is around some controversy. Okay, we are in the data set. So when you are reporting some controversy or a story around the controversy, okay, so the first thing that the first category can be that the editor or the newspaper reporter tried to connect both sides of the controversy and they were successfully contacted. So suppose there is party X, suppose there is a political controversy, there is party X and party Y, both are parts of this controversy. So if both party X and party Y could be successfully contacted, that's one category. An explicit statement that one side refused comment. Okay? So this is another thing. So that means the reporter tried to contact both sides, but one of the sides refused to comment. An explicit statement that one side could not be contacted. So again, here you see that the reporter has made an attempt to contact, but somehow within the predefined deadline of the news to be sent to print, the other party did not respond. So they could not wait longer and the deadline passed and therefore they had to go for the press. And then the 4th category, no contact with one side of the controversy has been done and no explanation has been given why such a contact has not been done. So these are the 4 different explicit categories that the authors mention in order to operationalize fairness. However, for their data, they have collapsed the first 3 into successful contact or contact attempt mentioned. This is one category. And the second one is no contact. So this is how the fairness is defined. If the reporter has successfully contacted or made an attempt of, at least made an attempt of contact which has been mentioned in the news article, then this is considered to be fair. And if no contact has been made, so then this is considered to be unfair. So the reason, as I was telling you, that sometimes it is not always possible for the reporter to reach the source before deadline, or the source did not comment within the deadline. So in these cases, at least if there is a declaration made by the reporter, okay, that I have contacted both sides, one of them did not reply, and therefore I could not cover that side. Okay. And then the important consideration here is that the reporter has, as I'm telling you multiple times, so this is the point, that you will consider something as fair reporting if the reporter had made a genuine and honest attempt to reach out to both of the parties involved in the controversy. So now, second thing is operationalizing balance. Okay, so what do they do here? They compare the number of words given to the 2 sides of the controversy. Okay? So they try to see how many words have been allocated to either side of the controversy in the newspaper. And they use a word per inch formula. Okay? So I'll take a small stop here. Let me hear, like, if you have some questions, can you, if you can put them on the chat if you have some questions, or otherwise, like, please tell me if I should go ahead. I have a question now for all of you. But before I ask my question, do you have any questions till so far? Nobody is typing, so should I consider go ahead? Purnajoy?
Yes, sir.
I'm not seeing any type so far. So now my question. So why this words per inch formula? Can anyone quickly type on the chat box? Why this inch word per inch formula? Why suddenly this strange formula? We could have simply counted the number of words. Why this word per inch? What is the problem of simply counting the number of words given to either side of the controversy? Yeah, so somebody is telling that, yes. So that is the idea. So Mridul and Aditya have actually suggested some interesting points. Also Srijan. So the main idea is that you never know how these words are written. That's some words might have different fonts. Some words might be more distantly placed. Some words might be less distantly placed. Might have different styles, different headings. So all these things matter, and therefore the authors. So basically, type size, type density, and column widths. So all these that you have posted on the chat window are kind of covered. So this is why they use a word per inch formula. And in this word per inch extraction, what that they do, they find out prominent entities. Okay. So, and then they see what is the number of words those entities quoted, paraphrased, or cited. So this is what they call the story length. Okay. So you find out some entities in those controversial stories, and you find out how many words these entities have quoted, have paraphrased, or cited. This defines the story length of that part of the controversy. Now, balance is the average difference in the percentage of total story length given to the two sides of the controversy. So it's like you compute the total story length of side 1 and total story length of side 2, and you find out the percentage difference, and then you make an average over all the stories that you are considering. That gives you the balance. That gives you the formula for the balance. Any questions? Otherwise, I'll proceed. So these are the two operationalizations that the authors make. No question? So we go to the next slide. So, but you see, like why I told you earlier also that, no, I think, yeah. So I have actually crossed one slide. So that's what I was trying to find out. So their data set. So they considered 21 newspapers. Out of this, there are 9 which are categorized as prestige papers and 12 which are the largest circulation daily newspapers, all of these 21 based in the US. Okay. So 9 of them are prestige papers that is categorized by their press authoritative agency, and there are 12 largest circulation papers. What they use as their stories are the defamation in controversial local stories. So you understand, right? Defamation is something that is very sensitive. So that's why they consider defamation in controversial local stories as their topic. And local here means standard metropolitan statistical area in which the newspaper is located. So every location is actually earmarked with the metropolitan statistical area code, and you find out in which area this newspaper is located, and that's how you disambiguate the locality of that story. Okay. So the types of controversies in their stories include controversies related to local government, local public school education, and local business. These are the three types of stories that they cover, three types of controversial stories that they cover. They had two coders who independently annotated the stories of the above types, and there was a third coder who made the final judgment. So some of them were hard to disambiguate, and therefore there was a third adjudicator who was called for making the final judgment. So this data set spans 1 week from April 21 to April 1986, and there are in total 343 stories that the authors actually annotate. I mean, the coders actually annotated. Any question with the data set? Any clarification? So there is some question. Yeah, so there is an interesting question, how to decide the size of the story. So I think after this data set slide, it is clear. So it is annotated. It's fully annotated manually. So there were these two coders who annotated manually the data, and then there was this third adjudicator who actually finally resolved all the conflicts. Does that answer your question, Punuja?
Yes, yes.
Okay, fine. Any further questions on the data set? Let's proceed. Okay, so now before they did a full-scale annotation, they did some pilot. So this is something that I also told you earlier. So this is like an active learning stage, but active learning framework, but it's just 2 stages. So for fairness, what they did was they studied the agreement among the 3 annotators when 25% of stories were covered. So out of 343 stories, when 25% of the stories were already annotated, they measured the agreement among the annotators, among the 3 annotators. And so since this was not a very difficult task, so the fairness definition was fairly straightforward. The agreement was kind of 100%. So that's a bit interesting. So it was not so difficult for the annotators to identify what is what, whether the story is fairly covered or not. So for the first 25% of the stories, they got 100% agreement, and they proceeded with the same protocol. For balance, as you understand, there will be some variations due to measurement and due to perception of the annotators. Okay, so what is big, what is small, this differs from eyesight to eyesight, and therefore there might be some variations. So just studying direct agreement was not a good idea. So therefore the authors actually did a reliability test, and when the annotators had found out the average space given to each side of the controversy for 4 stories, so for all the annotators, they do a t-test of the averages, and they found that the p-value was not significant. What does this mean? If the p-value is not significant, so typically we run for cases where the p-value should be significant, but here the p-value is not significant. What does this mean? Can someone quickly tell me? No answers? This should be an easy answer. Yes, so Srijan has answered, and also Sritigdha has answered. Both of them are correct. Also, Mridul has answered. All of their answers are correct. So that is, we can safely assume that the differences in the annotators in perceiving the balance is not significant. So therefore, we can go ahead with their annotation. If this balance estimates were, if the difference in the balance estimates of the annotators were very different, then the p-value would be significant. And since it is not significant, so therefore we can proceed with their annotations for further analysis. Now, the interesting part of the analysis. So this is the statistical analysis that they do. So the 343 news stories that I talked about, so this is distributed as you see in the table. So the prestige newspapers, the 9 prestige newspapers are Atlanta Constitution, the Baltimore Sun, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, the Courier Journal, the Milwaukee Journal, the New York Times, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the Washington Post. So these are all prestige newspapers. And then there are a bunch of high circulation newspapers like New York Daily, New York Post, the Detroit News, Chicago Sun-Times, Detroit Free Press, Newsday, etc., etc. So, and out of the 343 stories, this number that you see here is the number of controversies that a particular newspaper has covered. Okay, so 14 out of 343, 14 out of again 14 out of 343, 8 out of 343, and so on and so forth. Some of them have covered as large as 26 news stories in the prestige press, and in the high circulation press, some of them have even 29. The average number of stories covered by the prestige press is 14, and the average number of stories covered by the high circulation is 18, and the overall average is 16. Any questions with the statistics? I guess it's pretty straightforward. Okay, now the fairness results. This is kind of interesting. So you see, so fairness was measured based on whether both sides were represented or at least contact has been made, okay, and whether contact has not been made. So here the authors are measuring fairness as percentage of stories without both sides contacted. And what do we see? That the prestige press, at least there are 2 prestige press news articles which has always made the attempt to contact both the sides. So the difference percentage is 0, and their corresponding rank is 1. Okay. In general, the prestige press average, which is 9, is much lesser than the high circulation average, which is 20.7. It's much larger. So the 20.7 seems to be pretty unfair, with some of them the difference percentage going up to 45.5. So in 45.5 cases, the New York Daily News did not contact one of the parties in the controversy. Okay? And in general, you see that the prestige press has lower percentages. Of course, that's why the average percentage is also low, and the rank actually is also lower overall for the prestige press. So this was their first hypothesis, that for the prestige press, so we are running out of time already. So for the prestige press, you have a better fairness. So for the balance, as we said that we find out the percentage difference of the stories against and toward the controversy. Okay, so that same balance definition that we studied earlier. So they studied the balance across the newspapers, and once again you see that some of the prestige presses are much more balanced, okay, in the number of words that they give to each of the sides than the large circulation dailies. For instance, New York Daily News, the difference is like 43.3, okay, whereas the New York Times and the Louis Post-Dispatch, it's as low as 20. Okay? And these are the again the ranks based on these percentages. So this is the overall rank, and as you can again see that the overall rank, so it's the mean of the rank from fairness and mean from the rank of balance. So if you take the average of these two, that is what is this column representing. So you see some of them, like the Times in general, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and the Post, the Washington Post, these are actually having the lowest rank, the best in terms of fairness and balance both. Whereas in the other category, the large circulation ones, the good ones are like so-called good in terms of coverage, in terms of fairness and balance, are the San Francisco Chronicle and the Newsday. Whereas some of the worst ones are the New York Daily News, then you have Chicago Sun-Times, which is 18.5, but New York Daily News seems to be very, very biased. And also the average rank is much lower for the prestige press. So the nuanced observations. So these are some of the nuanced observations that the authors record. So performance levels with respect to fairness show a greater variation than balance. So if you see the slides, you will immediately understand that the performance levels with respect to fairness has a greater variation. So if you compute the standard deviation, then you will see, or the variance, you will see that in terms of fairness, it has greater variation. So the range of values among the newspapers and the difference between prestige and high circulation papers are greater for fairness than balance. So as you have seen, so for the fairness, it was like 45 versus 0. Okay. Whereas in balance, it was 20 versus 41. So the discrepancy is much larger in terms of fairness. So several of the newspapers performed well when it came to fairness, having more than 90% of their stories with both sides of a controversy presented. However, there are actually these 6 papers are culprit, had a quarter or more of their stories without both sides. So in giving equivalent space to different stories of a controversy, so these newspapers are not approaching balance. Okay. So in general, even 20 is not a good number. That's what the authors are saying. Even the prestige, so of course the prestige press is giving more equal or a more balanced view. However, still the difference is large. 20% is pretty large. So that is what their message is. And typical numbers should be somewhere around 5 to 10%, not more than that. So although fairness is being ensured by at least the prestige press to a large extent, balance seems to be on a lose-lose side. So we stop here, and now for the rest of the time, I mean, I think we are almost using if you have any questions, you can type on the chat. We have just 5 more minutes. Yeah. When you think about the questions, what was the overall feeling? Was this online mode okay? I know it's not as good as face-to-face class, but do you think it's okay?
Yes.
So I have also recorded the whole lecture, which I will put on the course website. So we are running out of time. If you have some queries, please let me know. Okay, Kostov says it was fine. Anybody else with any other query? So there is one point. This paper is not publicly available. We have kind of hacked the paper, So I cannot put this paper on the website. Instead, I will mail this paper on the Google group. So I would request you not to share with anybody outside your class, because this, we do not have subscription to this journal. IT Kharagpur does not seem to have subscription to this journal, and therefore we cannot share this on the course website. Of course, I'll share the slides as well as the video recordings, but not the original paper. Any other questions? Okay. I'll wait for 2 more minutes, at least till the time expires. And tomorrow we will start the class at 12, sharp at 12. Sorry, at 11, the normal class hours. Okay, so see you tomorrow at 11. Thank you for attending the classes.